It didn't start with the question. It started with a number that didn't behave like a normal number, 9.8 million, not rounded, not estimated, not approximately, precise. And when a number is that precise in a setting like a congressional hearing, it usually means one thing. Someone has already checked it more than once. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett didn't raise her voice when she introduced it. She didn't need to. "Mr. Miller," she said, steady, controlled, "your department's internal system shows 9.8 million border encounters over a 2-year period." She didn't rush the next line. "But your official testimony to Congress reports just over 3.1 million. Now the difference wasn't abstract anymore. It had shape. It had weight. "Help me understand something," she continued, leaning slightly forward. "How do 6.7 million documented encounters disappear between your internal system and what you tell Congress?" No accusation, no dramatic tone, just a question that forced a gap into the open, and that gap is what changed everything. Because hearings aren't won by who talks the loudest, they're controlled by who defines the problem first, and Crockett had just defined it in a way that couldn't be ignored. If you're new here, follow along closely, because this is one of those moments where the structure matters just as much as the outcome. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe, because we break down these high-pressure exchanges in a way most channels don't. Now here's what made this different. She didn't wait for Miller to answer. She already knew what he might say. "Maybe there's a classification issue," she said calmly. "Maybe certain encounters aren't included in public reporting." She paused. "So I checked." That line did something subtle but powerful. It removed uncertainty. This wasn't a question anymore. It was a setup. She opened her laptop and turned it slightly toward the committee. "This is an audit conducted by the Office of Inspector General," she explained. "Completed recently. It compares your internal encounter database with the reporting system used for congressional testimony." Then she repeated the numbers, slower this time. "Internal system, 9.8 million. A beat. Reported, 3.1 million. Another beat. That leaves 6.7 million records unaccounted for in your reports." At this point, Miller shifted slightly in his chair, not dramatically, but enough to signal awareness, because now the issue wasn't theoretical. It was documented, and Crockett wasn't done building. "The audit didn't find a random error," she continued. "It found a pattern." She lifted a printed page, records being filtered out before they reached the reporting system. She let that sit. A filter. That word reframed everything. Not missing, not delayed, filtered. "So I want to be very clear," she said, looking directly at him now. "Who authorized that filter?" That was the moment the room tightened, because this wasn't about numbers anymore. It was about decision-making. Miller's attorney leaned in slightly, speaking under his breath. Miller didn't respond. He kept his eyes forward. Crockett didn't repeat the question. Instead, she answered it herself. "This directive," she said, lifting another document, "sets the criteria for what gets excluded from reports." She read from it. "Encounters that result in immediate removal, excluded. Encounters resolved within 72 hours, excluded. Encounters lacking full biometric confirmation, excluded." She lowered the page. "And this directive carries your approval." Now the pressure had a name attached to it, and still, no response. At this point, most hearings would pivot. Another member would jump in, the chair would redirect, the moment would pass. But Crockett didn't allow that. She reached into her pocket, pulled out her phone, opened the stopwatch, held it up just enough for people nearby to see. "I'm going to measure something," she said quietly. She pressed start. 10 seconds. No one spoke. 20 seconds. A pen scratched rapidly somewhere behind Miller. 30 seconds. Crockett didn't move. She let the silence do the work. Because silence in a setting like this creates pressure in a way words can't. 40 seconds. A voice from the side asked if the implication was intentional misreporting. Crockett answered without looking away. The data speaks for itself. 50 seconds. Miller's posture stiffened. His hand stayed flat on the table. 60 seconds. 1 minute, Crockett said, almost as if marking time in a courtroom. Then she stepped forward slightly. These aren't abstract entries, she said. These are individuals processed through your system. 70 seconds. And they don't appear in your reports. 80 seconds. The chairman leaned forward. Mr. Miller, you're expected to respond. No response. 90 seconds. Now the silence had turned into something else. Not hesitation, not delay, absence. If you're watching this, pause for a second and think about it. What does it take for someone to remain silent under this level of pressure? Drop your thoughts below, because what comes next only raises that question further. Crockett checked the timer. 2 minutes. Then she escalated. The audit didn't stop at identifying the filter, she said. It examined what happened to those excluded records. She lifted another page. A significant portion were categorized as immediate removals. She paused, but the corresponding removal records don't match. She let that settle. In other words, the outcome doesn't line up with the classification. No reaction. Another portion was marked as voluntary departure within a short time frame. She continued, but exit records don't reflect that volume. Now the gap wasn't just in reporting, it was in outcomes. 2.5 minutes. Crockett stopped moving entirely. You're not just excluding entries, she said quietly. You're creating inconsistencies that can't be explained through normal reporting. 3 minutes. She reached for one final document. This is where it becomes more serious. She looked down briefly. During the period this audit was being conducted, a large number of records were removed from the system. She looked back up. Not filtered. A pause. Removed. 3 minutes, 30 seconds. The metadata confirms they existed. Another pause. But the full records are no longer accessible. 3 minutes, 50 seconds. The access credentials used trace back to your office. 4 minutes. Now the room wasn't just quiet, it was fixed. Who authorized those deletions? She asked. Nothing. Crockett glanced at the stopwatch again. 4 minutes. Then she said something that changed the tone entirely. I'm going to let this run. No threats, no raised voice, just continuation. 260 seconds? 265? 270? 271. She stopped it. 4 minutes and 31 seconds. Then she turned toward the committee. The witness has declined to answer. Her voice didn't change. I move that this be formally noted. A second voice followed. Seconded. And I recommend further review based on the discrepancies identified. Seconded again. No extended debate, no interruption. It moved quickly, because by that point, the moment had already happened. Crockett gathered her documents. Then she added one final line directed at Miller. You had multiple opportunities to clarify the difference between your internal data and your reported figures. A brief pause. You chose not to. She lifted the report slightly. The numbers remain. Another pause. And so does the question. The session ended shortly after. No dramatic exit, no final exchange. Just a quiet conclusion to a moment that didn't need noise to carry weight, and at the center of it, a gap that was never explained. 9.8 million recorded, 3.1 million reported, 6.7 million unaccounted for in testimony, and 271 seconds where no answer came. If you want more breakdowns like this, where the structure, the timing, and the pressure tell the real story, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. Because moments like this don't trend by accident, they're built, and once you understand how they're built, you start to see them everywhere.